But really, I should have said it is God's love. I think we know the difference, really. The closest thing I can come up with is that rush of love we have for someone when we first have this deep desire to be with them. The passionate love that we share but so easily kind of wanes. That's the kind of love that's always existent in God. That burning desire to be with and for us. Grace happens. Grace is strange, surprising, and it's usually not what we're anticipating. And when God answers our prayers, and God does, is it usually the way we are expecting it? Not usually. We've got the first story today from Genesis, Sarah and Abraham. As the story goes, both Sarah and Abraham are very old, not expecting anything like a child. Sarah laughs. I kind of imagine her saying, "Ha, right, me have a child." Yeah, right. And yet it does happen. They are reminded, and we are reminded, that nothing is too extraordinary. Nothing is too outrageous for God. Grace is queer. Now I want to explain that because that word is pretty loaded. Many of us painfully remember and associate that word with the homophobia that we encountered in our youth. The word was used to make us feel ashamed, sick, sinners with no hope. And corporately, we don't like that word. I don't like it in that perspective, in that usage. But in the late 80s and the early 90s, there were groups that came about that reclaimed that word for us. You might recall, we're here, we're queer, get used to it. Amen. That word is reclaimed. Stop to think of the last time you used that, or you heard that word used in a derogatory way. Unfortunately, it seems like how gay has replaced it. I looked up the definition of queer in Webster's. It says, different from the usual, strange, eccentric. And that's what I'd like to talk about today. God's grace is strange. God's grace is queer. God's grace is not like we expected. But God's grace is love. Real, passionate, want to be intimate with us all, love. I spent some time with the author of the contemporary reading today, Henri Nouwen, at the Trappist Monastery, the Abbey of the Genesee. He and I usually sorted and washed raisins. What were we doing that for in a monastery? Well, this monastery was the origination point of monk's bread. So if you've ever had monk's bread, chances are you might have had a raisin that I washed. The abbot there is John Eudes Bamberger. I called him Bam Bam. I've always been a little bit of reverend. He was trained as a psychiatrist, and he had worked, or he had actually lived in the community with Thomas Merton. And he shared a couple of things with us that changed my life. The first is, prayer is doing nothing well. The second is, that God has a sense of humor. But that sense of humor is irony. The message of our faith is very ironic. Life through death, joy from sorrow and pain, a child in old age. The creator of the universe, the one who placed all the stars in the sky that I am so in awe of, has chosen me, has chosen each one of us. Grace happens. How wonderful, how strange, how queer. Today is Father's Day, and I want to acknowledge all the fathers here. And I think John's going to mention it later on, but we have these carnations up here for those who are fathers or those who live in the spirit of good fatherhood. I want to thank God for all fathers. I want to thank God for my father, who was a tremendous example of self-sacrificial love and understanding. For many years, I was called father. And I always kind of had to scratch my head because I didn't have any children. Day like today, people would come up to me and say, "Happy Father's Day." I thought they were kind of playing on the title. But I asked them if that's maybe what they were doing. And to my pleasant surprise, they said no. They said, "You've been a spiritual father to me. You've made God's love real to me. You've sustained my faith. You've guided me on my spiritual journey." Grace happens. I'd like to share a true story with you. And it kind of starts off in ancient history, back when I was in the seminary. We had fieldwork assignments, and I was assigned to this parish, and at that time we called them inner cities. And the name of the parish was Our Lady of Mount Carmel. It had started off as an Italian parish, but it had become pretty much a Hispanic parish by now. And it was right on the edge of where a couple of years prior there had been riots. And about an 8 to 10 square block area had been burned down and was still very much like a war zone in terms of the way it looked. The reason why I say that is I kind of want you to realize that this is not a place that was a place of privilege. And yet it was a very faith-filled and very grace-filled place. I got to know a young boy there, and I guess the mutual gaydar went off, because he would come up to me, and I guess it didn't take much gaydar on my part, because he would always say, "I want to be like Chiquita Banana." I thought, well, that's pretty clear.